just going to make your life easier in the future. So I have two balls right there. No jokes. And when I hit play, you can see how they're just stretching out. So that's all they're doing is just stretching out. Which one seems to have a little bit more realism to it?
The one in the center?
The one on the right? This one? Yeah.
Yeah.
And why is it?
It doesn't jiggle as much. Yeah, the other one jiggles like more. It just looks like it's made out of jello.
Well, also look at how it's scaling too. The one on the left is just going down. That's all it's doing. The one on the right is actually, as it pushes down, it's actually stretching out. So you think of like a water balloon or any balloon ball. You push it down, it doesn't just like get shorter, but it actually like pushes out the sides. So do you see the width of this? As it gets shorter, it's stretching out the sides. So that's an important thing to have as you start to animate your bouncing ball, to make sure that you can't just stretch it out vertically because it's not going to look right. The one on the left looks like it's made of nothing. It looks totally fake. The one on the right, it feels like it has some sort of substance, some sort of volume applied to it. Okay? So that's obviously key to making sure that your ball looks like it's bouncing correctly, because if it doesn't have that, then it's obviously not going to look correctly. They both also look like they're sitting right on the ground and bouncing up from there. There's no trick to that. The only thing we do is we go to our side view or front view, and I go to each one of my keyframes and just make sure that the ball is sitting right on the ground. And then I set a keyframe on it. There. And that's what makes it look like it's landing right on the ground. There's no setting we can tell Maya to automatically do. It's just a frame by frame type thing. Now this is doing everything manually. So far we've taken all these and we've just keyframed scale outward and downward to create this kind of blobby mess. But there's other ways we could do it too, not specifically for this assignment, but for other assignments we could use other things. So under the rigging menu, they have this deform menu, and these are basically all different ways that we can deform an object. So some of these are actually, I would actually use them for modeling also, not just rigging something. The one that I want to point to is this one under nonlinear called squash. Okay, and what this does is it has this handle here, so there's a big loop like a hula hoop. There's a plus sign on the top and a plus sign on the bottom. And when I go over here to the squash one, and I take this factor and I middle mouse button click and drag, do you see how it's automatically doing what I was just doing with the scale and the other part? Okay. Now we didn't use this because our ball is rotating too. So what would happen is here it works okay, but it actually gives us like a weird pull. Like if you look right there, it has a weird like pinching up at the top, where it looks more like UFO than it does this one, which is bending or rounding nicely all the way around. Okay. So that's one reason we don't use it. The other reason is we would typically want it to squash from the bottom, like that. And if I squash it from the bottom, you know, we get pretty decent results. But then when it flips over, it's going to start squishing from the top then, instead of squishing from the bottom. So we couldn't use this kind of rig for something like that. All right. But I would never rule these things out for using it for some types of animation. I would use, this is just a fun one to do, curve tool. Alright, you probably have seen these kinds of things in like cartoons. I'm going to go to a circle, and click that, and go to surface, extrude. I want to make it polygons. And that way I can flip it around. Reverse. There we go. And I was going to add some more divisions going that way. There we go. Okay. So what I want to do in this case is, let's say I have this object here and I want to make it look like there's something kind of big running down the middle of it. I can use some of these deformers for doing exactly that. So one of these is called they move everything around, so I have to find the name of it. It's under sculpt, texture. Let me find it. Swash.
Wire?
No, I think it's a, it's not wire.
There's a second wire halfway down.
Right, no, that's not it. There's another one that's like a puckery type thing. They moved it maybe into animation. Sometimes they move things over in animation just to be jerks. Keys. Constrain. I'll have to go back to rigging. Blend shape, cluster, delta mush. I mean, some of these will work doubly. It was sculpt deformer. This one might be it. Yep, that one's it. Alright, so the sculpt deformer, what it allows me to do is take this and have it basically like go along the surface. So if I have this underneath, okay, you can see what it's doing here. Now there's other options that I could do. I can say flip, which is basically like put it to the other side and make that a bit bigger. And now as this thing would get animated, I could have it look like it's pushing this surface out some. None. Oh, there we go, deformer. There we go. So you have to position it correctly so it looks like it's underneath. Alright, I'm at it again. That was a sculpt deformer. Yes. Oh, there it is. I forgot to grab this thing. That's why I didn't do that. Okay. So now I'm moving these two things into here. And now, if you look at this, now I can stretch this out. And it looks like there's actually something inside of it. And I could take this and move it around. Oops. Move both of these around. And you can see how I could animate something like this moving along here. So all these things that we're doing is not just like, you know, that's the only spot we would use it for. We could actually use that same bouncing ball processes for something like this. Because we could actually animate this thing kind of squishing and squashing and whatever else inside of here and make it look like it's bouncing inside of this area or doing something along those lines. Okay. So there's a bunch of neat little tools that are inside here. This is another one of my favorite ones, which is shrink wrap. Basically, I would have two surfaces. I just want one object on top of the other, like to match up perfectly. So let's say I grabbed, let's say I grabbed a plane, and I want that plane to stick perfectly on top of this other surface. So I go to deform, shrink wrap. Oops. Shrink wrap. And that plane just attaches itself right to that surface. And then as this is moving around, you can see how it's moving along with it. Now, some of the settings obviously need to be tweaked because this is not laying out perfectly. Target inflation. There we go. So I can inflate my target a little bit, and then we would get something that's a bit better. Okay, and it probably needs a bit more divisions and not so much movement on there. I could tell it to preserve the shape. I could tweak some of these settings some more and get some really neat effects with this. But again, this could be something I would use for modeling as opposed to using it for animation. So even though we're doing animation stuff, sometimes these things apply across the board, which is pretty neat. All right, so lots of deformers. We'll kind of play with a lot of these as we go. Some of these we're never going to touch, like the muscle and bone system. We're never going to touch that in the class, but it's definitely worthwhile looking into if you wanted to go into doing like character animation stuff. So if you wanted to model a character and animate a character, make it look like he's actually moving correctly, you would use these muscles and bones. And this is something where we could teach an entire class just on using the muscle and bone system because it's so complex in how it works. They also have things like the wire tool, the wrinkle tool, lots of neat stuff inside there. The other thing I wanted to mention is like adding keyframes in here. We already know how to add keyframes by grabbing the item and clicking on this and hitting S if we've set that up inside of our keys, setting keys, and telling it to all keyable from channel box. That way it only keyframes whatever we have selected here. Okay, so I showed that last time, I believe it was. Now we can also manipulate keyframes in the graph editor. So there's my graph editor. We can also manipulate keyframes in the dope sheet. Another spot I like to edit them is right here in the timeline. So as we're playing with keyframes, sometimes it's kind of a hassle to have to jump out and jump back in and jump out and jump back in. So I'll do my animation here. So if I have this ball and I want to tweak the animation on it, I can hold down Shift and middle drag, and it'll highlight a section of keys. Then I can go to this arrow here and scale it. So as I'm dragging this, it's actually scaling those keyframes together. As I drag the other side, it scales these ones together. As I drag the middle one, it will move the keyframes. Okay? So this is a quick way to say, you know what, this starts a little slow. You know, he goes, maybe I want that to happen a little quicker. So grab these, scoot them down, grab these, scoot them down. Very easy to do. You have to eventually get aware of what keyframes are doing what. So on here, I know that my first keyframe, the ball is round. The second one is flat. The third one is flat. And then everyone after that, he's either up or down. Okay? And that way I know that these two are where he's flat. So if he's flat too long, I know I need to shrink the distance between those. Maybe shrink the distance between these. Or maybe increase this distance just to kind of emphasize that a little bit more. Okay, so you can play with your keyframes inside the graph editor, inside the dope sheet, or even inside of your timeline to tweak them to get them to be where you want them to be. And it's not necessarily to get them in the right spot, it's to keep playing with them until they get to the right look of it, till they get to the right spot. You're never going to set them and just be perfect every time. You need to just get quick at them so that you can obviously just go in here, set some keyframes, change them, set some keyframes, change them. Always tweaking, working, trying to get to that finished product. I've watched animators go through this thing where they'll spend a half hour setting up this animation and realize they don't like it and they'll wipe it and do it all over again, changing how they're doing all their stuff. So don't be afraid of, this isn't working out. Shift, right click here, delete, and now all the animation's gone, and I'll do that animation over. Okay, this here took me about 2 minutes to set up while you guys were doing your test. As you do this stuff, it gets faster and faster and faster. So don't be afraid. Wipe it out, start it again. Wipe it out, start it again. All this stuff builds up to being better at animating. All right, I think that's all I want to say about the animation stuff. Make sure you're doing your stick animation, you're doing your ball animation. This week is going to be just finishing those ones up. Okay, stick and ball, finishing up those two projects.